All right, we're diving into a story that really, I think, captures everyone's attention when we hear about it.
Yeah.
And that's a midair collision.
Oh, yeah.
This one happened at Marana Regional Airport in Arizona.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to look at not just the what happened, but also the why. What does this tell us about, the bigger picture of aviation safety?
Yeah, I think even though the investigation is ongoing, we can look at the details we do have now and kind of get an idea of some of the factors that might be at play here.
Yeah. So kind of setting the scene, we've got two single-engine planes, a Cessna 172S and a Lancair 360 MK2Os. I think those are, these are pretty typical for like personal flights, maybe some flight training.
Yeah, a lot of people like renting them and going up for fun.
Right, exactly. And but unfortunately, around 8:25 a.m. local time, these two aircraft collided.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that this happened at what's called an uncontrolled field.
Right.
And so I think for a lot of us, who don't fly planes, what does that even mean?
So basically it means that this airport, unlike, a big commercial airport, doesn't have a control tower.
Right.
So there's no air traffic control actively directing the aircraft. And so instead of that, pilots use a system called CTAF. It stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency.
Okay.
So they're basically all on the same radio frequency,
Yeah.
communicating their positions, their intentions to each other.
So it's kind of like a self-regulation.
Exactly. Yeah, very much a self-regulation system. So, the pilots have a lot more responsibility in those situations.
And when we're thinking about this collision, we're waiting for the investigation. I was wondering if, like, the reliance on visual scanning, you're in these smaller aircraft, do you think that could have played a role here?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And especially, when you think about maybe converging flight paths, were there any visibility obstructions? Were there challenges specific to that time of day?
Oh, yeah.
Those are all things that the investigators will be looking into.
And then another layer to this is, Senator Mark Kelly actually flies out of this airport.
Yeah, he does frequently.
And he had put out a statement, and I thought it was really, he said, "I fly out of this airport often, including just a few days ago. My thoughts are with everyone involved and their families." And so it really kind of brings home that this isn't just an incident. It's, people.
Yeah, right. These are real people, real families that are impacted by this.
Yeah. And so it kind of leads to a bigger question, too, of like, how can we prevent these things from happening, especially when you have this uncontrolled airspace where it seems like that margin for error might even be a little bit smaller.
Yeah, that's the core issue we're talking about here.
Yeah.
How do we improve safety, even in these more challenging environments?
Right. And I think that's what we want to look at in this deep dive. So we'll kind of come back after the break and talk more about uncontrolled airspace and how pilots kind of have to be their own traffic controllers in these situations.
Yeah, sounds good. When we think about uncontrolled airspace, Marana Regional Airport isn't the only one.
Right.
There's a lot of these smaller airfields, especially serving maybe, smaller communities or just general aviation.
And it's kind of surprising to me that there wouldn't be a control tower. Like,
Yeah.
I think when you think about flying, you always assume there's someone, directing the traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the norm that people think of. But in these uncontrolled environments, it really changes how everything works.
So if I'm a pilot and I'm approaching Marana Regional, what do I need to do to make sure I'm, getting there safely?
Well, before you even get close to the airport, you're going to be tuning into that CTAF, that Common Traffic Advisory Frequency we talked about. And you're going to be listening to other pilots, announcing where they are, what they're doing.
Okay.
And that gives you an idea of, the traffic flow, what's going on. And then as you get closer, you start broadcasting your own position, your altitude, your intentions.
So everyone kind of knows where everyone else is.
Exactly. It's like a constant conversation.
Okay.
But it's not just talking. You also have to be really vigilant about looking out the window, scanning for other traffic.
Yeah.
And that's where those right-of-way rules come in that we were discussing earlier.
So like if two planes are approaching each other, yielding to the right, that kind of thing.
Right. But it's a lot. It's not just looking at a piece of paper. You're up in the air.
Yeah.
You've got multiple planes, maybe at different altitudes. So you have to really, really be aware of your surroundings.
I imagine that's got to be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot to keep track of.
Because you're also thinking about flying the plane, you're thinking about, navigation, the weather, all that.
Right, exactly. You got a lot going on up there.
And so, going back to what happened at Marana, even if everyone's doing all the right things, are there, is there anything we can do to maybe prevent some of those human errors or oversights?
That's a really good question. And that's where, some of the technology comes in and potential regulatory changes. So we talked about ADS-B, for example,
Yeah.
which is, it stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. And basically, it's a system that allows aircraft to broadcast their position, their altitude, all that kind of information in real time.
So, like, almost a GPS tracker, but more detailed.
Exactly. And the big thing with ADS-B is that not only air traffic control sees it, but other aircraft, if they're equipped, can see it too.
Oh, so even in uncontrolled airspace, you can kind of know where everyone else is.
Right, even without radar coverage. So that can really, really help with situational awareness.
But I imagine not everyone has that system. Right?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges with ADS-B. It's becoming more common, especially in newer aircraft. But a lot of, especially general aviation aircraft, haven't adopted it yet. It can be expensive to install.
So until everyone has it, it's not as effective.
Right, but there are incentives out there, and the FAA is pushing it pretty hard. So I think we will see a lot more aircraft getting equipped with ADS-B over the next few years.
Now, beyond that, what about these regulatory changes? Like, what are some ideas that are out there to improve safety?
Well, one that's been discussed is the idea of part-time tower operations. So instead of having a control tower running all the time at some of these smaller airports, they would only be active during busy periods, peak hours or times when there's a lot of traffic.
Okay.
So that would give you that extra layer of safety during the times when it's most needed. And it's obviously cheaper than having a full-time tower.
Makes sense. Are there any other regulatory things that are being looked at?
Yeah, there's also some discussion about, maybe changing the criteria for what makes an airport uncontrolled. So maybe some airports, because of their location or the terrain around them or the type of traffic they get, maybe they shouldn't be uncontrolled anymore.
So it sounds like we're still figuring out the best way to approach this.
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing conversation. And beyond that, there's also just thinking about pilot training.
Okay.
How do we train pilots to make better decisions, to manage risk more effectively, especially in these uncontrolled environments?
Yeah, because it seems like this is something that, we're going to have to keep working on. It's not going to be solved overnight.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue.
So we've been talking about this midair collision in Arizona and all the issues that it brings up.
Yeah, lots to think about when it comes to safety in uncontrolled airspace.
For sure. And it seems like there's no, one perfect solution, right?
Not really, no. It's going to take a bunch of different approaches, I think, to really improve things.
So we've talked about some of that, like the technology, potential rule changes. But let's dig into that a bit more. Like what could that actually look like?
Sure.
You mentioned ADS-B before.
Yeah.
Can you remind us, how that technology, how would that actually help in these uncontrolled areas?
Yeah, so ADS-B, it stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. And basically what it does is it allows aircraft to send out their position, their altitude, all that data in real time.
Okay, so it's kind of like having a GPS tracker, but with more info.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. But the key is that it's not just air traffic control that sees it. Other planes that have ADS-B can see it too.
Oh. So even without a tower, pilots can know where everyone else is.
Exactly. So it's like, even if you don't have radar coverage, you still have this extra layer of awareness.
That sounds pretty amazing, actually. Are there any downsides to ADS-B, though? Is it hard to implement or?
Well, one of the big challenges is that not all aircraft have it yet.
Right.
It's becoming more common, especially on the newer planes.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot, especially in general aviation, that don't have it yet. And for some owners, the cost to install it can be a factor.
So it's kind of like more people need it for it to really work, but it's expensive to get.
Yeah, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing there.
Okay. But the FAA is encouraging people to get it right.
Yeah, they are. And they have some incentive programs too. So hopefully we'll see that adoption rate going up.
Now, you also talked about some possible rule changes. What are some ideas that people have been talking about to make uncontrolled airspace safer?
Well, one that's been discussed is part-time tower operations.
Part-time.
Yeah. So instead of having a control tower operating 24/7, they would only be active during certain times, like peak hours or when there's a lot of traffic.
Oh, so just when it's really needed.
Exactly. It's a way to provide more safety without having to have a full-time tower.
Okay. What else? Anything else people are thinking about?
Yeah, there's also some discussion about, maybe we need to reevaluate how we decide which airports are uncontrolled in the first place. So, some airports, maybe because of where they are or the kind of terrain around them or just the volume of traffic they have, maybe they should actually have more oversight than they do now.
So, like, maybe the rules need to change a little bit.
Yeah, maybe so.
Interesting. Oh, it definitely seems like we've got a lot to think about.
We do, but I think it's encouraging that people are really looking at this and trying to come up with ways to make things safer.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from this specific collision to the bigger picture of uncontrolled airspace.
It's a complex issue, that's for sure.
It is. But, hopefully by talking about it, by learning from these incidents, we can actually make a difference and prevent future tragedies.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about, really.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And, we'll keep you updated on any developments in this story and in aviation safety in general.
It's been a great discussion.